Welcome to Playbook for Performance, the official podcast of Shawna Corden, the Joan of Arc for corporate healing and performance. Join the quest to make work fun again by preparing leadership for engaging workplaces. And now, your host.
Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of the Playbook for Performance podcast. I'm your host, Shawna Corden, and we're talking all about team coaching topics. Today specifically, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, and you're probably sick of this topic, but hopefully we're going to approach it from an angle that you haven't quite thought of before. A lot of us have heard a lot about diversity and inclusion, and we think, yeah, this is kind of frustrating. Especially if you're a white male, you're probably like, I am the last unprotected class that's out there. And you're right. But I am going to talk about it today in the hopes that this will help you think a little bit more differently about diversity and what it can do for you. So let's get started. So I want to start off with an anecdote that Jack Canfield shares in relation to the topic of masterminding. And if you're not familiar with masterminding, we do have a podcast on it way back when. But to recap, basically a mastermind ideally is a group of 6 to 8 people, ideally quite diverse, that are working on either personal or professional development. And we want the group to be as diverse as possible, but ideally folks have achieved similar levels of success within their domain. Meaning you don't have a total rookie with a master, because the rookie might get a lot out of it, but the master may not, and vice versa. But we want really diverse groups. And the illustration that we have to support this is a story about a terrible ice storm that had happened in a small town. And all of the engineers were trying to figure out basically how to de-ice the power lines so that we could restore power to all these people. And, you know, people were getting pretty fatigued because it was dangerous work. They couldn't exactly have all of the technicians or engineers climb up all these icy poles and knock ice off the power lines, etc. And all of the people in the room basically had the same background, the same experience, etc. So they were all kind of in a rut in terms of how they were thinking about the problem. However, the admin that was in the room that was there to take notes basically thought aloud, and clearly she felt like she had the permission to do so because they were getting quite silly with their solutions. They were talking about training squirrels to do it and how they could make them little hard hats. And, you know, it was really going off the rails. And she said, you know, I was a nurse in Vietnam, and I remember when the helicopters came in with the wounded, it would just blow everything within a quarter mile horizontal and off to the sides. And the whole room turned and looked at her because they realized they had the solution with her contribution there. They were basically going to fly helicopters alongside the power lines, and the force of the pressure from the propellers would basically shear off all that ice, and it would keep everyone safe. They wouldn't have to climb the poles, so on and so on. So that example I tell because that woman in the room was the diversity in the room. She was not one of the trained technicians or engineers that climbed poles and serviced power lines. She came from an Army background. She had been a nurse. She had been exposed to these helicopters, etc. So the reason that we want to push diversity is because it brings a wealth of different ideas, concepts together to innovate in the best way. Again, if you've got everyone trained, if they went to the same schools, they had the same backgrounds, they're likely going to think in very similar ways. And so how can we support your organization's challenges with diversity. So, and in the case of the mastermind anecdote, having your mastermind be as diverse as possible is quite helpful too. So, you may not have a large team. You may not have a lot of diversity in your team. It doesn't mean that you need to go out and basically post positions that only people of color, women, folks with challenges can apply for. And of course, that's great. That's great. But if they don't have the qualifications for what you need, you may need to cultivate that diversity artificially. And I know that some people will be quite upset by this suggestion, but business is business. This is the way it is right now. If we can aim for it, great. But if we don't have it and we don't have the budget for it immediately, let's play with the deck that we've been dealt. So, role play. Role play can be super helpful in terms of assigning one to be devil's advocate. That is an example of diversity. If the whole group is gung-ho on an idea, we often say, well, to play devil's advocate, what about this, this, and this? And often we're talking about risk or challenges, things like that. So that's a really good example. You can invite people to be a part of your debate or discussion. I encourage all of my clients, not only do we work on their personal branding, but we also work on forming their own board of directors. So this is not a formal published organization chart, but it's something that they have basically their own personal org chart that they may not ever inform people of, that says, this is the person I'm going to go to when I have a legal question. This is the person I'm going to go to when I have a health question. This is the person I'm going to go to when I have a parenting question. All of those things. So think of your own board of directors, or if you don't have your own board of directors, start working on populating your own org chart. And who could you invite that would bring some diversity to your group, a different way of thinking? If you're all a group of wealth managers and you all have MBAs or degrees in finance, what if you brought a lawyer or a journalist or someone like that to the team to help with the debate? Also, one of the things that I like to recommend to my clients, and I don't mean this in the same way that an actual therapist might mean it, but I call it immersion therapy. And that is to start exposing yourself to different ways of thinking. If you always read the Wall Street Journal, maybe you want to read USA Today or the New York Times. If you always watch CNN, you might want to watch Fox. If you always read House and Garden, you might want to pick up Popular Mechanics. It's just this idea to start thinking out of the box, think outside your usual kind of neural pathways. I've done some work with Laura Berman Fortgang, who wrote a great book called 90 Days to a New Life Direction. And when clients get stuck in that process, we employ something called hobby by emergency, I think is what we call it. But it's this idea that learning something new, hopefully something tactile, knitting, playing piano, something like that, that just gets your brain flowing in a different way, can be super helpful. I was working with a client the other day and we were talking about some activities for an offsite. And the group tends to be a little bit introverted. And I said, when I have introverts, I always bring tactical toys to play with as we're thinking about things. Whether it's Play-Doh, koosh balls, pipe cleaners, something like that. The equivalent of like a fidget toy that's quiet, that they can get their hands moving while they're thinking about these things and how to formulate their thoughts verbally. So those are all opportunities. I would say, watch a brief video together on something totally different than what your business works on. So for example, if you're working on getting your widgets out the door, you might want to watch a TEDx talk on gardening. Something that just gets you out of the normal routine of how you think about things, and what it could do for you. So I know for certain the more diverse the opinions, the ideas, the thought processes, the better end product we'll have at any given time. So you also might want to think about your customer base. There are a lot of organizations that as they talk about business and what needs to be done in their department or in their business plan, they will have a chair that is labeled the customer. And it might have a cardboard cutout of, their avatar customer. Or it could be something different, or you may have an individual on your team assume the role of the customer and what the customer wants. So if you know from customer satisfaction data that people are upset with your shipping methods, you could have that person there kind of pounding on the table to say, we need to change the shipping. This is terrible. Your clients are diverse. So think about that in terms of what you can do. You may even want to invite a client, a real life client, come in, sign in a non-disclosure agreement, and basically be a contributor. So there's a lot of ways to look at this, and we'll talk about this more on the flip side of this, which is inclusion. But the important thing is to recognize diversity is not just a color palette or what can be seen. There is a ton of benefits that come with diversity in terms of increased creativity, better decision making, and improved employee engagement. And there is lots of data that shows that people want to support companies and work at companies where they feel like there's someone there who looks like them or thinks like them. So think about that in your process when it comes to diversity. The other thing I want to point out is inclusion, right? So when we talk about inclusion, this goes back to Emily Post 101. It's an invitation. It's hospitality. It's good manners. And I know that manners have declined fairly significantly since COVID, but this is a chance for all of us to practice better manners and invite people to participate. And it's not just to be in the room and be an observer, but it's actually having a seat at the table and their opinion is being asked. Now, you do have to be careful about this, and I'll talk about this in a little bit here, but this whole idea of inclusion is not just for them to be silent, but often when we include people who are typically not included, they are not well prepared. And so the worst thing in the world is to not be educated to know what to expect. So we want to make sure that in this process, we are preparing them to be successful, to be comfortable, just like if you were inviting somebody in your home and they'd never seen chopsticks before, offering them a fork. So letting people know that there's nothing to be concerned about, there's no threats here, that they are doing you a big favor, and so on. The other thing I want to offer about inclusion is that one of the best benefits of inclusion is solving the problem at the source. Often my clients are at C-suite level and management, but they are often working on problems that are happening 2, 3, 4 levels below them. And often they decide at this level, but they don't ask the people who are actually doing the work. And so inviting those people to be part of the solution and asking their opinion, and if their opinion is not doable, explaining why. If it's a cost issue, if it's an economies of scale issue, if it's a safety issue, making sure that they understand that the ideas that they've submitted, it's not that they're not valuable, but they are not feasible because of blank. Otherwise, they're like, I'm not doing that again. That was not worth it. It was kind of humiliating. I told them all this stuff. They didn't even take any of my ideas, and I'm the one who does it every day. So do be careful about that. Other things you can do include focus groups. So you've probably been familiar with focus groups at one time or another, where you draw in a group of people who could be likely customers or voters or something like that, and you present to them an idea, whether it's packaging for a product, whether it's the ending to a movie, whether it's a candidate's policies, whatever it might be, and then asking their feedback. And not just on what they observed, but how it felt, how it related to them, what did they walk away with, all of that. Those can be very helpful. Also having a task force that has a mixed level of people in the room in terms of manufacturing and management, or marketing and sales, or customer service, etc. And making sure that the task force understands that in the title of the task force, that all of those folks are equal, regardless of where they sit in the hierarchy of the organization, because their opinions and their work are creating an end result that's super important. And again, I just want to recap, just prepare those that are invited. It's terrible manners to invite someone to an event and them not being dressed properly or whatever it might be. So you might be wondering, I've got a small team. I'm only going to be able to hire 1 or 2 candidates. How do I diversify? Well, again, what we want to do is we want to look at the viewpoints. Okay. One of I love this example when it comes to Jesus and the tax collectors, right? So we've got the Pharisees that are here going, he's eating with tax collectors. And they are the ones, and the Sadducees, and they are super concerned with the law. They are concerned with the Sabbath. They're concerned about kind of the legality of things, and keeping things pure and not defiling. And if you're not familiar with tax collectors, they're basically betraying their own people on behalf of another government, and they're skimming stuff off the top. So they're not like the cream of the crop of society. And so, Jesus is like, hey, if I'm with these people, everybody knows they're welcome with me. People are not going to fear me and keep their distance, etc. It's like, I am including these people because A, they're valuable to me, but B, this is kind of spreading the word. Just like he says, you don't send sick, or you don't send well people to a doctor. The doctors treat those that are sick. And so we don't need to have everybody from the same schooling, same education, same background coming in, because that's not going to give us the diverse opinions we really need. We need to broaden it. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to hire different positions, but you do want to make sure that you are collecting other opinions, and especially reflecting your customer base. Really what we're looking at is, what is there to learn? A couple years ago, I wrote a book called Meet Me in the Middle, really talking about people who were polarized. It was not necessarily about politics, although that is one of the issues that is very polarizing to people. But it is this idea that, we should be able to say, well, let's agree to disagree, and we're going to maintain our friendship. Sometimes political rivals can be very good. That's why we are all super excited when our Congress works across the aisle to enact something that's for the good of the people. But what is it that this person who is really pushing my buttons or really triggering me, what is there that I need to learn from them, right? And sometimes we don't want to face it. I had a colleague years ago when I was taking a training class, and all of us were kind of tweaked by one student. And she said, I know why that person bugs me. And I went, why? And she goes, because I was her. 10 years ago, I was that person. And I was like, oh. So we all feel like we have to learn from those people, or actually, we not enough feel that we need to learn from these people. So if someone is really pushing our buttons, it pays to take some time to really think about it and say, what is it this person has to teach me? Okay. And that is part of diversifying. There's a great tool out there. I teach an ethics class for coaches, and one of the things that comes up a lot is bias. In fact, it's the first paper that we ask these folks to write in their master's program is, what are my biases? Because biases can be good, like I really admire work ethic, and they can also be bad. I think that white people are the ones that are armed the most. There's a great tool, and I'm going to misidentify it. I think it's at Yale, about implicit bias. And basically you can take this randomized test that's on any, I think it chooses the topic for you, but it will show you images, it will ask you questions, and then it will determine what bias you have in this department. So very, very interesting. We all have biases. I'm not inviting you or telling you that you need to fix those, because sometimes bias protects us. But the most important thing is to be aware of our bias. And if it is interfering with having a clear decision to be made. So think about that. Finally, in the same way that we're talking about inclusion, we want to prepare our diversity candidates to succeed. So a lot of organizations have high potential development programs. I've taught in a lot of those programs. I've coached a lot of candidates in those programs. We really need to make sure that if it is our true intention to promote women, minorities, people with challenges, that we really make sure that they know what is expected of them, what's expected at the level that they're going to. Coaching and mentoring helps with that tremendously. Knowing what to expect in terms of talking them through it before they get there, and of course shadowing. If they can be a fly on the wall in those meetings and understand what it's like to be that director or be a partner in the firm, whatever it might be, that is super helpful as well, because as people grow in an organization, the demands on them grow in the organization, just like their salary, hopefully. So one of the things I highly recommend with all diversity and inclusion work is to do a lessons learned. So let's say you've done your listening tour, you've done your inviting them to the table, you've had your first level of graduates from the high potential development program actually get promoted into the roles that we were trying to prepare them for. How did it go? Did they feel welcomed? Were they prepared? Were they supported? Did they feel like it was a token thing and that it really wasn't of value? Why and why not, right? When you did include the others, did they fit in? Why or why not? I've had many candidates who were defiant and didn't want to kind of morph into a team member. They felt like they were losing themselves in the process, or they were losing that unique identity. And that may be true, but also teamwork is huge, right? A lot of the research that I'm reading now is like, team fit is probably more important than qualifications in a lot of cases. And so if you have someone who is just insistent on being different and not cooperating, maybe that's not the good fit. That diversion or that inclusion was not successful. But the one question we definitely want to ask all of them, and this comes from Marshall Goldsmith's Feed Forward, is what is the one thing that you could have done to improve the situation? It might have been, hey, I want to go on a business trip with one of these senior leaders and see what it's like to be in this position 24/7 for 3 or 4 days. Or I want to shadow for a while, or I want them to look over my presentation and coach me to give the presentation. Whatever it might be, making sure that you take the time to do the lessons learned about that, super important. So in terms of kind of homework and things that you can do in terms of diversity and inclusion, educating your team members, talking about diversity and inclusion as not a color palette, but diversity of ideas. That is what we're really looking for, because it improves innovation, it improves engagement, we have better results. So, and it attracts more of our customers, more of the ideal team players. So they need to understand that it's not just something that's being imposed upon them, but it's super important. We want to make sure that we're looking at diverse candidate pools. If your organization has only looked at, these schools in this area of the country, maybe you need to look with a broader net, include some state schools, look at different candidates that have come from the working sector as opposed to straight out of college, and so on. Employee resource groups can be a great way for people to feel like they belong. So we've talked a lot about the Gallup Q12 in the podcast in the past. But one of those 4 areas is, do I belong? And employee resource groups can really help with that. If your organization is too small, maybe look at one that is towards the industry. So if you are a wealth manager and you only have a team of 10, does your greater organization have something for the wealth management in the state or in the region, things like that? Mentorship programs, super important. I can't tell you how important mentoring is. It doesn't have to be a huge time commitment. It can be as little as an hour a month. The mentee should be saying, here's what I want to learn, X, Y, Z. And then the mentor says, I can help with that. I tried to match people previously the other way. That was a big fail, but we learned a lot. Originally, I was like, okay, everybody post what you'd be willing to teach. And they're like, well, I might be underqualified. And so they weren't really comfortable with that. So when we reversed it, big change, went a lot better. Do make sure you have a mechanism to collect regular feedback from employees about their experiences and their perceptions. Sometimes people feel that somebody's been promoted only because of their diversity status, and then they see them fail. That's really unfortunate, and I lay that at the feet of management for not adequately preparing people. And then finally, just celebrating diversity. And this can be from your community. It could be from your family heritage. It could be all kinds of stuff. But even just a meal can be really educational and quite fun. So look at opportunities to celebrate that. Again, the world is so much richer with everything not being just black and white. So next time we're going to be talking about team building activities. So if you have questions about that, be sure and send them in. We'll include them in the podcast. Don't forget, obviously we offer one-on-one coaching for leaders, but also we do team coaching. So helping the team form more cohesively, upgrading their skills. We can do that in workshops, team meetings, so on. And we mentioned this last week, and thank you so much for your responsiveness on this. We were thrilled to see the feedback. We have been developing an app to improve resilience, and no, it is not an excuse to get your organization to work you harder. We got some feedback on that. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So this is really about your ability to weather life, whatever it's throwing at you, with grace. And that means that we need to prepare you to do that. And so we want some beta testers for the app. The only obligation you have in being a beta tester is giving us feedback on the app. Did you like the flow? Was it too fast? Was it too slow? Was the app too hard to read on your phone? Whatever it might be. We would love your feedback. And so if you are willing to be a beta tester, please send us a note at podcast@shawnacorden.com. And you, in the subject line, you can just put beta tester. You don't have to put anything in there. We will be contacting all of our volunteers probably in the next couple weeks here as we get ready. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, to have a beta at the beginning of September. And so we're really excited about that. And the reason that we are pursuing this is that all of the research shows when it comes to change, the most successful organizations have great leadership, which we're already working on the leadership with leadership coaching. They have great communication, and that's something we deal with in one-on-one coaching and team coaching. But thirdly, it depends on the resilience of the workforce. So if the workforce is burned out, change is likely to fail. So we really want to support folks. I taught a variation of this in a class back when I was at corporate. I've put literally 150,000 people through a version of this, and we've improved on this. So it's the most popular that I've taught. It's my favorite to teach. And so I can't wait to spread it to the world. So again, if you'd like to be a beta tester, just drop us a note. In the meantime, take good care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Playbook for Performance. To learn more about Shawna Corden, her consulting programs and tools, please visit her website at shawnacorden.com and follow us on social media at Shawna Corden.